Hello there, I'm Catherine Nicholson, looking inside the Americas with you on France 24. Coming up in this week's show, is a woman's right to choose under threat in the United States? We're reporting on the family planning clinics that say they're close to shutting their doors 6 months into the Trump presidency. Jobs everywhere, but not a candidate to fill them. Find out how a decision in Congress has left employers in Michigan scrambling to find vital seasonal workers. And we're looking back at a key date for the independence movement in Quebec, 50 years on from an historic visit by France's General de Gaulle. First, though, it was a partial victory for Donald Trump and his attempt to overturn Barack Obama's healthcare laws. American senators squeaking a victory in a vote on debating changes to what's been dubbed Obamacare. Now, the highly regarded John McCain made a dramatic return for the occasion following his diagnosis with brain cancer. However, there is still no plan for what could potentially replace the now 7-year-old healthcare reforms, with various options on the table seen as likely to strip millions of Americans of their access to medical cover. Insurers and hospitals alike are said to be worried at the current deadlock. Zoning in now on one issue that affects women's health, family planning, which is now under severe pressure in certain parts of the United States. It brings us to our number of the week, which is 1. There being just one clinic now in the state of Kentucky that offers abortions. Delano D'Souza tells us why some campaigners fear that the service could disappear altogether.
Each day, women in orange vests gather to form a symbolic barrier. They're standing to protect the last abortion clinic in the state of Kentucky. Across from them is a different gathering, with anti-abortion protesters taking to the streets.
I see a lot of intimidation tactics. I see comparisons to activities along the lines of the Holocaust or activities from white supremacist groups. Some of the protesters will compare escorts to Nazis.
Mixed in with the protesters, a fundamentalist Christian organization. A federal judge ruled they should remain away from the facility's entrance. But in spite of the ruling, they're making their voices heard.
Under no circumstances, no exceptions, it is murder, and it should be penalized as such and criminalized and abolished in our land.
In the early 1980s, Kentucky had a dozen abortion clinics like this one. Dr. Ernest Marshall opened his in 1981. But since the Republican Party seized control of the state government, it's been doing everything in its power to clamp down.
We have never been under siege like this. We never had any question as to whether we would exist. So this is the most we've ever been under siege.
The landmark case of Roe v. Wade legalized abortion in 1973 across the United States. But since the early 90s, states can add on certain restrictions. Under ultra-conservative Governor Matt Bevin, they've increased in Kentucky. Now, abortion is banned after 20 weeks unless the mother's life is in danger. Technicians are also obliged to do an ultrasound and show fetal images to the woman before consent is granted.
We are a pro-life state. It is a state where the vast majority of Kentuckians value the sanctity of human life and want to protect it to the absolute degree possible.
Officials in Kentucky allege the state's last abortion clinic was out of compliance with its hospital and ambulance service agreements. The clinic sued and a trial is now set to start in September.
Russia has not been far from the headlines in the United States for many months now, and this week it was back in several stories. The president's son-in-law spent 2 days denying he had any links to Moscow. Jared Kushner getting a grilling from the Senate and House Intelligence Committees as they investigate claims that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia to interfere with the 2016 presidential election. Later in the week, the House voted to slap new sanctions on Russia, along with Iran and North Korea, all three countries accused of threatening American interests and destabilising their own neighbours. Now, what's a restaurant without waiting staff to deliver orders, or a farm without strong hands to harvest the produce? Well, the answer is in trouble. That's the situation many businesses in the United States have found themselves after Congress effectively cut this summer's visa programme for seasonal workers by failing to renew an exemption for returning staff.
Paul is preparing orders as fast as he can. The restaurant where he works is understaffed because of a shortage of seasonal worker visas. The Jamaican native considers himself one of the lucky few.
Normally I do like 6 shifts now, 5 shifts. Now I'm doing like 6 shifts because of the cap of the visa. You know, we don't have enough staff, so I'd end up having to do a lot more hours, which is fine for me, but it's not fine for the other guys who get trapped home and didn't get to come out, you know, so.
Tourism on the small Michigan island of Mackinac generates around $200 million in revenue for the local economy every year. The industry normally relies on around 4,500 seasonal workers. But the already restricted H-2B worker visa program was effectively halved by a decision made in the Republican-controlled US Congress in December 2016.
We need to have the jobs on Mackinac Island so that we could service about 1 million people a year, but we really don't have enough local population in order to fulfill that. So we're not taking away local jobs. We need these jobs in order to make the local economy go.
Steve employs 25 people on the 6-month renewable visa. Jobs he says he would struggle to fill without the H-2B program.
For us, it's difficult to find American workers who will commit to come up here for, let's say, 4 to 6 months. We are in a remote area. As I mentioned, Mackinac County, 11,000 people. There is no workforce here, extra workforce.
It isn't only the tourism industry that's suffering. The farming and fishing industries are also heavily reliant on seasonal workers. Under pressure from senators and state governors, the Department of Homeland Security has now announced it will issue a one-time increase of 15,000 additional H-2B visas. But this may be too late for many businesses hoping to make the most of the summer season.
Well, let's take you through some other top America's news stories in brief. In Colombia, another historic step for the FARC as it aims to transform itself from armed guerrilla group to political party. This week, the FARC announced it would formally register as a party on September the 1st, in line with its historic peace deal. Honouring fallen police officers in Brazil, posters showing the names and faces of the 91 officers killed in the line of duty so far this year are being pasted up around Rio de Janeiro. The non-profit behind the project says it wants to call attention to the number of violent police deaths in the city. And tensions in Venezuela grow to fever point. A 2-day strike bringing businesses, transport and more to a standstill, just days ahead of a planned vote called by President Maduro on forming a kind of super Congress, a body that his opponents believe would turn Venezuela decisively towards autocracy. Our picture of the week comes from one of America's few majority French-speaking regions, Quebec in Canada. Now, it's of French General Charles de Gaulle, 50 years ago this week, uttering a simple phrase in Montreal that made locals dream of independence from their dominant English-speaking countrymen and women. Delano de Souza looks back.
Montreal's town hall and its balcony serve as a part of history. An exhibition underway allows residents to travel down memory lane into the famous speech of General Charles de Gaulle 50 years ago.
It provides me with a good reminder. I was quite separatist. I was with a friend at the time, and we were very, very proud. We really got the impression that General de Gaulle placed Quebec on the world map.
The 24th of July 1967, a historic visit by France's president to Canada. General Charles de Gaulle was given a hero's welcome in Montreal, in the French-speaking province of Quebec. Around 15,000 people gathered to hear the French president speak at the city's town hall.
C'est une immense émotion qui remplit mon cœur en voyant devant moi la ville de Montréal française.
General de Gaulle ended his speech with a small phrase which had Canada's government up in arms, but left residents of Quebec rejoicing.
le Québec! Vive le Québec libre!
During the president's visit, the movement for a free Quebec was dreaming of independence from Canada, a country that was largely favorable to English speakers. The province of Quebec was a former French colony, and de Gaulle's words were all that was needed to create the perfect storm.
The sense of provocation by de Gaulle was evident. During one of his walks, he asked his Army Chief of Staff, Admiral Philippon, "What would you say if I said, 'Long live a free Quebec'?" The military man was scared and said, "No, General, you can't say that." And de Gaulle replied, "We'll see, it will depend on the circumstances."
50 years later, the phrase General de Gaulle uttered in Quebec still brings out a sense of nostalgia.
At
the time, we were hoping to make Quebec a country, but we were stupid. We were young. There were no economic problems like there are today. And as Quebecois, we ensured that it wouldn't happen that way. But de Gaulle's speech gave us permission to believe.
After his shock proclamation, General de Gaulle shortened his visit to Canada, but his words remained enshrined in the history of the province until this day.
Well, our final item this week sounds like one of those classic pub debates. Who would win in a race between the world's fastest human swimmer and a great white shark? Well, luckily for American Olympian Michael Phelps, he didn't have to get into the same pool as his fishy competitor to find out. This was, in fact, a simulated 100-metre race put together by the Discovery Channel. The 28-time Olympic medalist was allowed to use a monofin to even things up a bit, but he was still pipped to the post by his computer-generated foe by 2 seconds. Well, if Phelps was disappointed, he probably had nothing on some of the viewers who had tuned in specially, many of them complaining that using a CGI shark was tantamount to, you guessed it, fake news. Still very spectacular pictures there, and that does wrap it up for this week's Inside the Americas. We'll see you again next time.
Across Africa, presented by Georgia Calvin-Smith.
From North to South Africa, from Bamako to Nairobi, from Accra to Mogadishu. Bringing you all the political, economic, cultural and social news from Africa for a better insight into an ever-changing continent.
Across Africa on France 24 and France24.com.